A stranger at the gym had a tattoo of my grandpa's face. The barbell slipped from my hands and crashed onto the gym floor with a metallic clang that echoed through the entire weight room. Every head turned toward me, but I barely noticed. My eyes were locked on a man doing bench presses 15 feet away, specifically on the black and gray tattoo covering his left shoulder. It was my grandfather's face. Not similar. Not kind of like him. It was absolutely, unmistakably Harold Hank Morrison, complete with his crooked smile, the scar above his left eyebrow from his army days, and those deep-set eyes that used to light up when he'd sneak me extra cookies before dinner. The same face I'd stared at in framed photographs every day for the past 3 years since his funeral. "You okay there, buddy?" The tattooed man had noticed my staring and was sitting up on his bench, wiping sweat from his forehead with a white towel. He was probably in his 50s, built like someone who'd spent serious time in gyms, with graying hair and an expensive-looking watch. I managed to nod and mumble something about losing my grip, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. The man went back to his workout, seemingly unbothered, but I couldn't look away from that tattoo. Below Grandpa's portrait, in elaborate script lettering, were the words, Harold Morrison 1943 to 2019, and beneath that, Brothers in Arms. The dates were right. Everything was right. But I had never seen this man before in my life. I stumbled over to the water fountain, my legs feeling like rubber, and tried to process what I was seeing. Grandpa had been a quiet man who kept to himself after Grandma died. He'd lived alone in his small house on Maple Street, spending most of his time watching old war movies and tending to his tomato garden. The idea that he had some close friend, close enough that the guy would get a massive shoulder tattoo of his face, was impossible. When I looked back, the man was loading more weight onto his barbell. 2 45-pound plates on each side. This wasn't some casual gym goer. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate asking if I wanted pizza for dinner, but I ignored it. Instead, I pulled up Grandpa's obituary, which I still had bookmarked in my browser from when I'd helped Mom write it 3 years ago. I read through the list of surviving family members, my mother Sarah, my Aunt Linda, my sister Emma, and me. No mention of any military buddy or close friend. The man finished his set and stood up, grabbing his water bottle. The tattoo was even more detailed than I'd initially realized. Whoever had done the artwork was incredibly skilled. They'd captured not just Grandpa's features but somehow his expression, that gentle but tired look he'd worn in his later years. "Excuse me," I heard myself saying as I walked over to him. My voice sounded strange and distant. "That tattoo on your shoulder, Harold Morrison. How did you know him?" The man's entire body went rigid. His water bottle slipped from his hand and hit the floor, bouncing twice before rolling under a nearby squat rack. For a moment that felt like an hour, we just stared at each other. Then his face broke into what might have been a smile, but his eyes stayed cold and calculating. "Hank was my best friend," he said slowly. "We served together." "Why do you ask?" "He was my grandfather." The man's face went through several expressions in rapid succession, surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like panic before settling into forced casualness. He bent down to retrieve his water bottle, taking his time, and I could practically see him thinking. "Your grandfather," he repeated, straightening up. "Well, I'll be damned. You look just like him when he was young. Same jawline." He extended his hand. "Name's Rick Castellano. Hank talked about his family all the time. You must be Danny, right? The one studying engineering." I shook his hand automatically, my mind racing. "It's David. And I'm studying business." A flicker of something, annoyance, fear, crossed his features. Right. David. Sorry, it's been a while since we talked." Hank had so many stories about his grandkids. But that was wrong too. Grandpa had always been terrible with stories, especially in his final years. He'd forget what he told you 5 minutes earlier. And if this Rick guy had been such a close friend, why hadn't he been at the funeral? Why hadn't any of us ever heard his name? "When did you last see him?" I asked. Rick took a long drink from his water bottle, stalling. "Oh, must have been a few months before he passed. We used to meet up regularly, you know. Play some cards, talk about the old days in the service." "What unit were you in together?" "Same as Hank. The 173rd Airborne." He said it confidently, but something felt rehearsed about his answer. "We jumped into Vietnam together in '65. Hell of a thing." I nodded like I believed him, but my stomach was churning. I'd grown up hearing Grandpa's war stories, and he'd never served with the 173rd Airborne. He'd been stationed in Germany with the 3rd Infantry Division and never saw combat. It was actually something he'd been self-conscious about. He'd felt guilty that he'd never made it to Vietnam while his younger brother had died there. "That's amazing," I managed to say. "He always talked about those jumps." Rick's smile widened. "Oh yeah, Hank was fearless. Remember that time we dropped into the jungle near Bien Hoa? Must have told that story 100 times. My hands were clenched into fists now. Grandpa had never jumped out of a plane in his life. He'd been terrified of heights, wouldn't even climb a stepladder to change light bulbs. "So the tattoo," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's a pretty big tribute. Must have cost a fortune." "Worth every penny," Rick said, rolling his shoulder to show off the artwork. "Had it done right after the funeral. Seemed like the right way to honor him, you know. We were like brothers." "Which funeral home did you go to?" The question popped out before I could stop myself. Rick's smile faltered for just a second. The one on Main Street. Morrison Funeral Home. Seemed fitting, with the name and all. But we'd held Grandpa's service at Peaceful Rest Memorial, 20 minutes outside of town. Morrison Funeral Home was where we buried my great-aunt 2 years later. I only knew it existed because Mom had mentioned the irony of the name. "Rick," I said carefully, "I think there might be some confusion here." His expression hardened. "What kind of confusion?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Mom's contact photo filled the screen, a picture of her and Grandpa from his last birthday. I almost didn't answer, but something made me hit the green button. "David, honey, are you busy?" Mom's voice was strained, tired. "Kind of. What's wrong? I'm at the lawyer's office. We just found something in Grandpa's papers that doesn't make sense. There are records of some kind of debt, and... She paused. There's a name here I don't recognize. Someone called Rick Castellano. The phone nearly slipped from my suddenly sweaty palm. I watched Rick's face drain of color as my mother's voice carried clearly through the gym's ambient noise. David? Are you there? Yeah, Mom. I'm here. I kept my eyes locked on Rick, who had taken a step backward and was now frantically toweling off his equipment like he was preparing to leave. What kind of debt are we talking about? The lawyer found some promissory notes in a safety deposit box we didn't know existed. David, it's for $67,000. Dated just 2 months before Grandpa died. My legs felt weak. $67,000 was more money than my family had ever had at one time. It was more than Mom made in a year at the elementary school. Are you sure it's real? I asked, though I was watching Rick stuff his gym bag with the urgency of someone who just heard sirens approaching. It has Grandpa's signature. His real signature, not the shaky one from his last year. And David, there's something else. Her voice dropped lower. This Rick Castellano guy. According to these papers, Grandpa was paying him monthly installments of $1,500 for almost 2 years before he died. Rick was walking toward the exit now, but slowly, probably trying not to draw attention. His expensive athletic wear suddenly made more sense. $1,500 a month for 2 years, that was $36,000, minimum. Mom, I need to call you back. But David. I'll explain later. I promise. I hung up and followed Rick toward the lobby. He'd made it to the front desk and was scanning his membership card when I caught up to him. Leaving early today? I asked, positioning myself between him and the exit. Yeah, got a meeting. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Nice talking to you, Dave. It's David. And funny thing, my mom just called. She found some paperwork with your name on it. Rick went completely still, his hand frozen halfway to his car keys. Around us, the gym continued its normal rhythm, the whir of treadmills, the clink of weights, the usual Tuesday evening crowd going through their routines. But in our little corner by the front desk, the air felt electric. I don't know what you're talking about, he said finally. $67,000, Rick. Monthly payments of $1,500. Ring any bells? His jaw tightened. Your grandfather was a grown man who made his own decisions. The admission hit me like a physical blow. So you do know what I'm talking about. Look, kid. David. David. Whatever happened between me and your grandfather was between us. It's got nothing to do with you. He's dead, I said, my voice getting louder. And apparently he died owing you more money than our family has ever seen. So yeah, it has something to do with me. Rick glanced around nervously. A few people were starting to stare, including Marcus, the evening manager, who was watching us from behind the front desk. This isn't a place, Rick said quietly. You want to talk, we can talk somewhere private. No. I was surprised by how firm my own voice sounded. We're going to talk right here. You've got a tattoo of my dead grandfather's face on your arm, you're claiming you served together when I know for a fact you didn't, and apparently he owed you enough money to buy a decent car. So start explaining. Rick looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something cold and calculating in his expression. Whatever he was about to say, I knew it wasn't going to be the truth. Your grandfather had a gambling problem, he said. The words hit me like a slap. That's bullshit. Is it? Rick's confidence was returning now that he'd found his angle. You think you knew everything about Harold Morrison? Kid, your grandfather was at the poker tables 3 nights a week for the last 5 years of his life. Started small, $20, $30 buy-ins at the VFW hall. But that wasn't enough after a while. You're lying. But even as I said it, pieces were clicking together in ways I didn't want them to. The nights Grandpa would disappear for hours without explanation. The way he'd become secretive about his phone calls. How he'd stopped giving us cash for birthdays and Christmas, claiming he was watching his pennies on a fixed income. Underground poker games, David. High stakes. Your grandpa thought he was smarter than the rest of us. Rick shook his head with what looked like genuine sadness, but his eyes remained calculating. I tried to warn him off, tried to get him to quit while he was only down a few thousand. But Harold was stubborn. Said he had a system. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. I should call Mom back, tell her what I was hearing. But something about Rick's story felt wrong, rehearsed, like he'd been preparing this explanation for years. So what, you were his bookie? I was his friend, Rick said firmly. I spotted him money when he needed it, helped him stay in games when he was sure his luck was about to turn. Those promissory notes. That was me being generous, letting him pay me back in installments instead of demanding a lump sum. $1,500 a month isn't generous. It's extortion. Rick's face hardened. It was a business arrangement between 2 adults. Your grandfather knew exactly what he was getting into. Then why lie about serving together? Why make up stories about Vietnam? Who says I made them up? But I caught the slight pause, the way his eyes darted left for just a second. Maybe you don't know your grandfather as well as you think. I know he was afraid of heights. I know he served in Germany, not Vietnam. And I know he never jumped out of a fucking airplane. My voice was getting loud enough that Marcus had stepped out from behind the front desk and was walking toward us. Everything okay here? Marcus was a big guy, probably 6'4", with arms like tree trunks. He looked between Rick and me with the practiced eye of someone who'd broken up plenty of gym disputes. Fine, Rick said quickly. Just heading out. Actually, it's not fine. I turned to Marcus. This man has a tattoo of my deceased grandfather on his arm, and he's been lying about how he knew him. Marcus looked confused. I'm sorry, what? Rick rolled his shoulder, showing off the portrait. Harold Morrison. Served together in Vietnam. David here is his grandson. That's the lie, I said. My grandfather never served in Vietnam. This guy conned him out of thousands of dollars and now he's wearing his face like some kind of trophy. Jesus, Marcus muttered. Look, guys, I don't know what's going on here, but you're making other members uncomfortable. Rick, maybe you should. I'm leaving. Rick shouldered his gym bag, but then he turned back to me with a smile that made my skin crawl. David, you seem like a smart kid. Smart enough to know that sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie. Your grandfather's gone. The debt dies with him. Walk away. What's that supposed to mean? It means your family doesn't want this getting out. Trust me on that. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Harold Morrison wasn't the man you think he was. You start digging into his business, asking questions around town, talking to lawyers, you're going to learn things about your precious grandpa that'll break your heart and your mother's too. You're threatening me. I'm giving you advice. Free advice, which is more than I ever gave your grandfather. Rick pushed past Marcus toward the door. Think about it, David. Think about whether you really want to know the truth about how Harold spent his last few years. The gym's automatic doors whooshed shut behind him, leaving me standing there with Marcus and a growing audience of curious members. My hands were shaking, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. You want me to call the police? Marcus asked quietly. I watched through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Rick climbed into a silver BMW parked in the front row. Even from this distance, I could see him talking animatedly on his phone, gesturing with his free hand. No, I said. Not yet. But I was already planning my next move. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rick's cold smile and that tattoo, Grandpa's face twisted into something ugly by association. At 2:47 a.m., I gave up and opened my laptop. I started with the basics. Richard Castellano and Rick Castellano pulled up dozens of results, but none seemed to match the man from the gym. LinkedIn profiles for accountants in Ohio, a Rick Castellano who sold insurance in Florida, even an obituary for someone's grandfather in New Jersey. Nothing about poker, nothing about military service, and definitely nothing connecting him to my grandfather. Then I tried a different approach. I searched for underground poker games in our area, illegal gambling rings, anything that might explain how these two men had crossed paths. What I found made my stomach drop. 3 local news articles from the past 5 years, all reporting on elderly victims of elaborate gambling scams. The details were sickeningly similar: older men, usually widowed, drawn into high-stakes poker games they couldn't afford. The con artists would befriend them, learn personal details about their lives and families, then use that information to build trust while systematically draining their savings. In one case, an 80-year-old retired teacher named Frank Kowalski had lost his entire pension, nearly $90,000, to a group the police called sophisticated fraudsters who prey on lonely seniors. The article mentioned that Kowalski had been too ashamed to tell his family until it was too late. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom, can't sleep either. Found more papers. We need to talk. I called her immediately. She answered on the first ring, her voice raw like she'd been crying. David, I've been going through everything again. That safety deposit box, there are more documents. Receipts, transaction records, it goes back almost 3 years. How much total? I'm still adding it up, but it's well over 100,000. Maybe closer to 150. Her voice broke. That's why there was no inheritance, isn't it? We thought he'd just been living paycheck to paycheck on his Social Security, but he had money. He had Dad's life insurance, the money from selling the farm, everything. And this Rick person took it all. I stared at my laptop screen, at Frank Kowalski's obituary photo. He looked a little like Grandpa, kind eyes, gentle smile, the face of someone who'd trust a friend. Mom, I met him tonight. Rick Castellano. He was at my gym. Silence. Then, what? He has a tattoo of Grandpa's face on his shoulder. A huge portrait with his name and dates, claiming they were military buddies. I told her about the conversation, Rick's lies about Vietnam, his veiled threats. Oh my God, she whispered. David, this is sick. Who does something like that? Someone who wants to keep using Grandpa's identity, I said, the realization hitting me as I spoke. Think about it. He's got the tattoo, he knows personal details about the family, he can spin stories about their friendship. He's probably still using Grandpa's name and reputation somehow. We have to call the police. With what? The promissory notes might be legal, even if they were part of a scam. And Rick's already covered his story, he'll just claim Grandpa borrowed money for gambling debts. Mom was quiet for a long moment. There's something else, she said finally. I found a business card in one of the folders. Castellano Construction and Development. It has Rick's name on it as owner. I immediately started typing, searching for the company. Their website was sleek and professional, featuring photos of luxury home renovations and commercial projects. Rick's bio page described him as a veteran-owned business with over 30 years of experience and mentioned his distinguished military service. He's using the veteran angle for his business, I told Mom. And I'll bet anything he's telling clients about his fallen brother, Harold Morrison. Probably gets him sympathy contracts, maybe even veteran preference deals. That's fraud, isn't it? Probably. But we need proof. I scrolled through the company's project gallery, recognizing several high-end neighborhoods. Mom, this guy isn't some small-time con artist. He's running a legitimate business worth millions, and he's built it partially on Grandpa's stolen identity. What do we do? I thought about Rick's parting words, his warning about letting sleeping dogs lie. He wanted me to be afraid of what I might discover about Grandpa. But looking at these construction projects, at his BMW, at the smug confidence he displayed tonight, I realized something important. Rick Castellano had more to lose than we did. We're going to destroy him, I said. The next morning, I called in sick to my statistics class and drove to Castellano Construction's office. I needed to see Rick's operation up close, understand what we were really dealing with. The building was in a newer business district, all glass and steel with perfectly manicured landscaping. A brass plaque by the entrance read, Castellano Construction and Development, veteran-owned since 1987. I sat in my beat-up Honda across the street for 20 minutes, watching employees arrive. Around 8:30, Rick pulled up in his silver BMW and strode through the front entrance like he owned the world. Which, apparently, he kind of did. My phone rang. David Morrison. Speaking. This is Detective Sarah Chen with the Financial Crimes Unit. Your mother filed a report yesterday about possible fraud involving your grandfather's estate. I was hoping we could meet. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Detective Chen's cramped office, surrounded by filing cabinets and coffee-stained paperwork. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catch every detail. Tell me about your encounter with Mr. Castellano, she said, pen poised over a legal pad. I walked her through everything, the tattoo, the lies about military service, the veiled threats. She took notes but her expression remained neutral. The promissory notes appear legitimate, she said when I finished. Your grandfather's signature, proper notarization, clear terms. Even if Mr. Castellano deceived him about their friendship, proving fraud will be difficult. What about the stolen valor? He's claiming military service he never had. That's a federal crime, but it requires proof he's receiving tangible benefits from the false claims. Government contracts, veteran discounts, that sort of thing. She flipped through a file. I ran a preliminary check on Castellano Construction. They've received 3 city contracts in the past 2 years totaling $2.8 million. 2 were veteran preference awards. My pulse quickened. That's fraud, right? If he's lying about being a veteran. Potentially. But we need documentation proving he never served. Military records, discharge papers, or in this case, the absence of them. She leaned forward. Here's what concerns me more. This matches a pattern we've been tracking. Elderly victims, substantial financial losses, perpetrators who maintain long-term contact to establish trust. There are others. At least 4 cases in the past 3 years with similar characteristics. Always men over 65, recently widowed or socially isolated. The amounts vary, anywhere from $30,000 to over $200,000. She pulled out a photograph. Does this man look familiar? The photo showed a heavy-set man with thinning hair and expensive clothes. He was shaking hands with someone at what looked like a charity event. In the background, partially obscured by other people, I could make out a familiar figure. Is that Rick Castellano? I pointed to the background. We think so. This was taken at a VFW fundraiser last year. The man he's with is Thomas Bergen, 73 years old, lost $86,000 in what he described as poker debts to a military friend. My stomach lurched. Jesus. How many people has he done this to? We're not sure. These crimes often go unreported because the victims are ashamed, or they die before family members discover the losses. She closed the file. Your grandfather's case might be our best shot at building a solid prosecution. What do you need from me? Documentation. Anything that proves your grandfather never served with the 173rd Airborne, never jumped into Vietnam, never had the kind of military friendship Castellano claims. She handed me her card. Also, I need you to stay away from him. Don't confront him again, don't go to his business, don't try to gather evidence on your own. I nodded, but my fingers were already itching to do exactly what she just told me not to do. That afternoon, I met Mom at the Veterans Administration office downtown. The clerk, a patient woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, helped us pull Grandpa's complete military record. Harold Morrison, enlisted March 1962, discharged November 1965, she read from her computer screen. 3rd Infantry Division, stationed at Friedberg Army Base, Germany. No combat deployments, no airborne training, no connection to the 173rd Airborne Brigade. Mom grabbed my arm. We have him. But as we walked back to the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, told you to let sleeping dogs lie. Check your email. The email was waiting when I got back to my apartment, sent from a generic Gmail account with a string of random numbers. No subject line, just a single attachment labeled Harold_Morrison_truth.pdf. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The first page was a bank statement from First National, dated 18 months before Grandpa's death. It showed a withdrawal of $12,000 in cash, followed by another for $8,500 3 days later. At the bottom, someone had written in red ink, Atlantic City, Lucky Sevens Casino. The second page was worse. A photocopy of what looked like a casino marker, essentially an IOU, signed by Harold Morrison for $25,000. The signature was definitely Grandpa's, even shakier than I remembered from his final months. But it was the third page that made me physically sick. A photograph of Grandpa sitting at a poker table, cards in his hand, chips stacked in front of him. He was wearing the blue cardigan I'd given him for his birthday 2 years ago. Standing behind him, one hand on his shoulder in what looked like a friendly gesture, was Rick Castellano. My phone rang immediately. Got my little care package? Rick's voice was casual, almost cheerful. Where did you get these? Harold was proud of his big wins, especially early on. Always wanted pictures to show his grandsons how well he was doing. Rick chuckled. Of course, he stopped wanting pictures after the luck turned. I stared at the photo, trying to reconcile this image with the grandfather I thought I knew. The man in the picture looked excited, alive in a way I hadn't seen him in years. This doesn't prove anything except that you took advantage of an old man. Doesn't it? Check page 4. The final page was a handwritten note on Grandpa's stationery, the cream-colored paper with his name embossed at the top that he used for important correspondence. Asterisk Rick, thank you for covering my marker at the Borgata. I know you didn't have to, and I promise you'll get every penny back with interest. The family can never know about this. They think I'm just their harmless old grandpa, and that's how it needs to stay. I got myself into this mess, and I'll get myself out. Your friend, Hank Asterisk. The handwriting was unmistakably his, down to the way he dotted his I's with little circles instead of dots, a quirk that had always made Mom smile. He begged me not to tell you, Rick said softly. Made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd handle the debt quietly. No family involvement, no drama. Just a private arrangement between friends. Bullshit. If that were true, you wouldn't have kept those promissory notes. Business is business, David. Harold understood that. The monthly payments were his idea, said it would be easier to hide $1,500 a month than a lump sum. There was a pause. Look, I tried to be reasonable about this. But you went to the cops, didn't you? My stomach dropped. How did he know about Detective Chin? Small town, kid. I've got friends everywhere, including a few at the precinct. Detective Chen's a real go-getter, I hear. Probably told you all about veteran fraud and elder abuse, right? I said nothing. Here's what's going to happen, Rick continued, his voice hardening. You're going to call her back and tell her you made a mistake. That you found some documents that prove the debt was legitimate, that your grandfather borrowed the money willingly. Then you and your mother are going to honor Harold's commitment and work out a payment plan for the remaining balance. What remaining balance? You already got over $100,000 from him. Interest compounds, David. At the rate we agreed on, 20% annually, your grandfather's estate currently owes me just over $43,000. You're insane. I'm a businessman. And if you don't play ball, I've got 3 more boxes of Harold's gambling records that'll make their way to every gossip in town. Your mom teaches elementary school, right? Wonder how the parents will feel knowing their kid's teacher comes from a family of degenerate gamblers. The line went dead. I sat staring at the photo for another 20 minutes, studying every detail. Grandpa's face, his posture, the way his fingers gripped the cards. He looked like a man who belonged there, who'd done this many times before. Maybe Rick was telling the truth about some of it. But that tattoo, that was still wrong. That was still sick. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, asterisk payment plan details attached. First installment due Monday. Don't make me get unpleasant, asterisk. I stared at Rick's payment plan until the numbers blurred together. $43,000, payable in monthly installments of $2,000. The first payment due Monday, 3 days away. At the bottom, in what I was starting to recognize as Rick's handwriting, was a note: Harold would want his family to do the right thing. But something about the casino photo kept nagging at me. I pulled it up on my laptop and zoomed in, studying the background details. The timestamp in the corner read March 15, 2019, 8 months before Grandpa died. But the more I looked, the more something felt off about his posture, the way the lighting hit his face. My phone rang. Mom's contact photo filled the screen. David, I've been thinking about those documents Rick sent. That handwritten note. I know, Mom. It's definitely his writing. That's just it. I don't think it is. Her voice was excited, urgent. Remember when Dad had that mini-stroke 2 years ago? It affected his fine motor control. He couldn't write cursive anymore, his hand would shake too much. But this note is in perfect cursive, just like his writing from before the stroke. I pulled the PDF back up, examining the handwriting more closely. She was right. The loops were too smooth, the pressure too consistent. In his final years, Grandpa's handwriting had become increasingly shaky and blocky as he switched to printing letters instead of cursive script. Mom, I think Rick forged this. That's what I'm thinking too. But David, there's something else. I called Aunt Linda in Phoenix. She said Dad visited her in January 2019, stayed for almost 3 weeks. But according to those bank statements Rick sent, Dad was supposedly in Atlantic City making huge withdrawals during that same time period. My pulse quickened. Did she keep any receipts? Airline tickets? Better. She's got photos from their trip to the Grand Canyon on January 18th. Dad's wearing that blue cardigan from the casino photo, and he's clearly in Arizona, not New Jersey. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with rage. Rick's been doctoring evidence. We need to call Detective Chin right away. But before I could dial, my laptop chimed with a new email notification. Another message from the random Gmail account, this time with the subject line, "Since you're not listening." The attachment was a single photograph, taken with a long-distance lens. It showed Mom leaving the Veterans Administration office that afternoon, clearly identifiable by her red coat and the purse I bought her last Christmas. Someone had been following us. My phone immediately started ringing, Rick again. I tried to be reasonable, he said without preamble. But you just can't leave well enough alone, can you? You forged those documents. That handwriting sample, the bank statements. Prove it. His voice was ice cold. And while you're trying, ask yourself if you really want to put your mother through a years-long court battle. Because that's what this becomes now. Depositions, testimony, cross-examinations where she'll have to answer questions about every detail of Harold's final years. You're the one who should be worried about court. Detective Chen already knows about your fake military service. Rick laughed. Chen's got nothing but your word against mine. But I've got boxes of evidence showing your grandfather was a compulsive gambler who borrowed money he couldn't repay. Even if some of the documents are enhanced, there's enough real stuff to destroy his reputation permanently. Enhanced. You mean forged? I mean curated. Harold really did gamble, David. Maybe not to the extent my records suggest, but he had a problem. The monthly payments to me. Those were real. Your grandfather really did sign those promissory notes, even if the original circumstances were different than what I've documented. I felt like I was sinking. What do you want? $20,000 by Friday. Cash. Consider it a settlement for the grief you've caused me this week. We don't have $20,000. Then find it. Take out loans, borrow from relatives, sell whatever you need to sell. But get me my money, or Sunday morning I'm driving to every church in town with copies of Harold's gambling photos. Monday morning they go to your mother's school district. Tuesday, I start calling local newspapers. The line went dead again, leaving me staring at the photo of Mom walking unknowingly under surveillance. I called Detective Chin immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I tried the main police number, but the desk sergeant said she was in court and wouldn't be available until Thursday morning. Thursday morning. Rick's deadline was Friday. That's when I realized Rick had timed this perfectly. He knew exactly how the system worked, knew that police investigations moved slowly while his threats moved fast. By the time Detective Chin could act on any new evidence, Rick would have either gotten his money or destroyed Grandpa's reputation so thoroughly that the truth wouldn't matter. I opened my laptop and started researching everything I could find about Richard Castellano, but this time I dug deeper. Property records, business licenses, court filings, anything that might give me leverage. What I found changed everything. Castellano Construction wasn't just veteran-owned, it was specifically certified as a service-disabled veteran-owned small business, which qualified Rick for exclusive government contracts. The certification required annual renewals with updated medical documentation proving his service-connected disability. I pulled up the Department of Veterans Affairs database and searched for Richard Castellano's records. Nothing. Not even a basic service record, let alone a disability rating. But it was his business partner that made my hands stop trembling and start moving with purpose. Margaret Castellano, Rick's wife, wasn't just some random wealthy woman. She was the daughter of Thomas Henley, who owned Henley Development Group, one of the largest construction companies in the tri-state area. According to the business filings, Margaret had provided the initial capital for Rick's company, $2.3 million in 2018, right around the time Grandpa's payments to Rick had started increasing. I kept digging. Margaret Castellano served on the boards of 3 veteran charities and had been featured in the newspaper last year for organizing a fundraiser that raised over $400,000 for homeless veterans. The article included a quote from her: "My husband's service in Vietnam taught us both the importance of supporting our military families. Rick wasn't just stealing from elderly men, he was using their money and stolen valor to deceive his own wife, a woman whose entire charitable mission was built around honoring legitimate veterans." Then I found the mortgage records. The Castellanos had bought a $800,000 house in Meadowbrook Estates in January 2018. The down payment was $160,000, almost exactly the amount Rick had extracted from Grandpa over 2 years. My grandpa had literally paid for Rick's dream house. I screenshotted everything and was about to call Detective Chen's voicemail again when my phone buzzed with a text from Mom, asterisk at the house going through more of Dad's things. "Found something important. Can you come over, asterisk." 20 minutes later, I was standing in Grandpa's old bedroom, which Mom had barely touched since his death. She was sitting on the floor surrounded by photo albums and loose papers from a shoebox she'd pulled from the closet. "Look at this," she said, handing me a small spiral notebook. It was taped to the bottom of his nightstand drawer. The notebook was filled with Grandpa's shaky handwriting from his final months, dates, amounts, and brief notes. But these weren't gambling records. They were something else entirely. Asterisk March 3rd, Rick says I owe $8,000 interest on February payment. Math doesn't add up but too tired to argue, asterisk. Asterisk March 15th, showed Rick the photos from Linda's visit. He got angry, said I was lying about dates. Why would I lie, asterisk. Asterisk April 2nd, Rick brought papers to sign. Says it's just a formality but felt wrong. Need to talk to lawyer but don't want family to know, asterisk. Asterisk April 20th, can't sleep. Keep thinking about Tommy Bergen at VFW. He mentioned losing money to poker friend too. Same story as mine. Coincidence, asterisk. I looked up at Mom. Tommy Bergen, Detective Chen mentioned him. He lost $86,000 to someone matching Rick's description. Keep reading, Mom said quietly. Asterisk May 1st, tried to find Tommy Bergen to compare stories but his daughter says he moved to assisted living after money troubles. Left no forwarding address, asterisk. Asterisk May 18th, Rick wants another $5,000. Says I lost big at Borgata last weekend but I was never there. Haven't left town in months. Something very wrong, asterisk. Asterisk May 30th, going to stop payments. Rick can't prove half of what he claims. If family finds out after I'm gone, at least they'll have this record, asterisk. Asterisk June 10th, Rick came to house. Showed me photos I don't remember taking. Says he has videos too. How can I prove I wasn't somewhere if there are pictures, asterisk. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before Grandpa died. Asterisk June 25th, Tommy Bergen is dead. Obituary says heart attack but timing feels suspicious. Rick smiled when he told me. I'm scared but who would believe an old man with memory problems? If something happens to me, this notebook is the only truth, asterisk. My hands were shaking as I finished reading. Mom, Rick didn't just con him. He was blackmailing him with fabricated evidence. The photos, the documents, even that handwriting sample, Rick's been manufacturing evidence for years. She pulled out another paper from the shoebox. Look at this. It was a business card for Bergen Photography Services with Tommy Bergen's name on it. On the back, Grandpa had written, asterisk Tommy's specialty was photo restoration and manipulation. Rick probably used his skills then silenced him, asterisk. I stared at the card, pieces clicking into place. Bergen wasn't just another victim, he was Rick's accomplice. He created the fake evidence Rick used to blackmail his targets. Until Rick decided Bergen knew too much, Mom said grimly. My phone buzzed with another text from Rick, asterisk 36 hours until deadline. Hope you're making progress on that $20K, asterisk. But now, looking at the notebook and Bergen's business card, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was furious. Mom, call Detective Chen's emergency number. Tell her we found evidence that Rick might have been involved in Tommy Bergen's death. I stood up, tucking the notebook into my jacket pocket. I'm going to pay our friend Rick a visit. David, no. He's dangerous. So am I said, surprised by the cold certainty in my own voice. And unlike Rick, I've got nothing left to lose. I drove straight to Meadowbrook Estates, my grandfather's notebook burning like evidence in my jacket pocket. The Castellanos' house was everything I'd expected from the property records, sprawling colonial with perfect landscaping, 3-car garage, the kind of place that screamed, new money. Rick's silver BMW sat in the driveway next to a white Mercedes SUV that probably belonged to his wife. I parked across the street and called Detective Chen's emergency line, but it went straight to an automated system asking for my badge number. Apparently, emergency had different meanings depending on who you were. That's when I noticed the woman in the front yard, kneeling beside a flower bed with gardening gloves and a small trowel. Even from a distance, I could see the resemblance to the newspaper photos, Margaret Castellano, the grieving daughter who built her charitable work around honoring veterans like the husband who'd never actually served. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was walking up their perfectly paved driveway. Excuse me, Mrs. Castellano. She looked up with the kind of practiced smile wealthy women used on unexpected visitors. She was probably in her late 40s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant ponytail and clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. Yes. Can I help you? My name is David Morrison. I think your husband knew my grandfather, Harold Morrison. Her face lit up with genuine warmth. Oh my goodness, yes. Harold. Rick talks about him constantly, such a dear man. I'm so sorry for your loss, David. Rick was devastated when Harold passed. The casual way she said it made my stomach clench. Rick hadn't just stolen from my family, he'd inserted himself into our grief, made himself part of our story. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about, I said carefully. There seems to be some confusion about my grandfather's military service. Margaret stood, brushing dirt from her knees. Confusion? What kind of confusion? Well, according to his official records, my grandfather never served with the 173rd Airborne. He was stationed in Germany with the 3rd Infantry Division, never saw combat, never jumped out of planes. But your husband has been telling people they served together in Vietnam. The smile faded from her face. That can't be right. Rick has photos of them together during the war. He's shown me the letters Harold sent from overseas. My pulse quickened. More fabricated evidence. Mrs. Castellano, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but my grandfather was never in Vietnam. I have his complete military file. She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like she was trying to decide whether to believe me. Rick wouldn't lie about something like that. His service record, his Purple Heart. What Purple Heart? From the shrapnel wound he got in Bien Hoa. It's why he still walks with a slight limp, why he can't do heavy construction work anymore. She gestured toward the house. That's how he qualified for his disability rating, how we got the veteran business certification. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Rick hadn't just stolen my grandfather's money, he'd stolen his entire identity and used it to build a fraudulent life with a woman who had no idea who she'd really married. Mrs. Castellano, I need to show you something. I pulled out my phone and found the VA database screenshot proving Rick had never served in any branch of the military. Then I showed her the photos Detective Chen had shared, Rick at the VFW fundraiser, the pattern of elderly victims, the systematic fraud. Margaret's face went white as she scrolled through the evidence. This isn't possible. We've been married 12 years. I would know if, she stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh God. The down payment on this house. Rick said it came from his construction savings, but the timing. January 2018. How did you know that? Her voice was barely a whisper. Because that's when my grandfather's payments to your husband reached their peak. $160,000 over 2 years, Mrs. Castellano. My grandfather's entire inheritance, paid to your husband under threats and fabricated evidence. Margaret sank down onto her front steps like her legs had given out. The business certification, the government contracts, the charity work. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Everything I've built is based on lies. Your charity work is real, I said gently. You've helped legitimate veterans, raised hundreds of thousands for good causes. You're not responsible for what your husband did. But I benefited from it. This house, Rick's business, our entire lifestyle. She stood up abruptly. I need to see those letters he showed me. The photos from Vietnam. We walked toward the house together, but before we reached the front door, Rick's BMW came roaring up the driveway. He jumped out of the car, his face twisted with rage when he saw me standing next to his wife. What the hell are you doing here? Having a conversation with Mrs. Castellano about your military service, I said calmly. Or should I say, your complete lack of military service. Margaret turned to face her husband, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't expected, not confusion or betrayal, but cold, calculating anger. Richard, we need to talk. Right now. Maggie, whatever this kid told you. Is it true? Her voice cut through his protests like a blade. Did you serve in Vietnam with Harold Morrison, or did you steal his identity to defraud the VA and my family's business? Rick's face went through the same rapid changes I'd seen at the gym, surprise, calculation, then desperate charm. Honey, you know how grief affects memory. This kid is confused about his grandfather's service record. Show me your DD-214, Margaret said flatly. My what? Your discharge papers, Richard. Every veteran has them. If you served in the 173rd Airborne, if you earned a Purple Heart, if you have a legitimate disability rating, then you have discharge papers. Show me. The silence stretched between them like a snapping cable. Rick's mouth opened and closed without sound, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely afraid. That's when I knew we had him. Rick's silence stretched for another 10 seconds before Margaret walked past him toward the front door. I'm getting those Vietnam letters you showed me, she said without looking back. The ones where Harold supposedly wrote about your combat missions together. Maggie, wait, Rick grabbed her arm, but she yanked away from him. Don't touch me. Her voice was ice. David, would you mind coming inside? I think you should see what my husband claims is proof of their friendship. Rick positioned himself between us and the door. This is my house. He's not coming inside. Actually, it's our house, Margaret said coldly. Bought with my family's money. And if what David is telling me is true, furnished with money stolen from his dead grandfather. I followed Margaret through the front door, leaving Rick standing helplessly in the driveway. The interior was just as impressive as I'd expected, marble floors, crystal chandelier, artwork that probably cost more than most people's cars. But now, knowing where the money had really come from, it all felt tainted. Margaret led me to a home office lined with dark wood shelves. She pulled out a manila folder from the desk drawer and opened it with shaking hands. These are the letters, she said, spreading them across the desk. Rick showed them to me when we first started dating. Said they proved what a close friendship he had with his war buddy Harold. I examined the papers, 3 handwritten letters on military letterhead, all supposedly from my grandfather during his deployment. The handwriting looked authentic, but the content made my skin crawl. Asterisk dear Rick, the fighting near Saigon has been brutal. Thank God I have a brother like you watching my back. When we get home, I want you to meet my family. You're the son I never had, asterisk. The letter was dated February 1965, when my grandfather would have been stationed in peaceful Germany, probably helping manage supply inventories. Mrs. Castellano, these are complete fabrications, I said. But they're good ones. Professional quality. Tommy Bergen, she whispered, apparently recognizing the name from our earlier conversation. What about Tommy Bergen? Rick had followed us inside and was standing in the doorway, his face flushed. Margaret turned to face him. The photographer David mentioned. The one who supposedly died of a heart attack right after you told Harold about it. Did Tommy Bergen forge these letters for you, Richard? You're both insane, Rick said, but his voice lacked conviction. Harold wrote those letters. I kept them for sentimental reasons. I pulled out my phone and showed Margaret the photo from my grandfather's notebook, Tommy Bergen's business card with the note about photo restoration and manipulation. Bergen was your forger until he became a liability, wasn't he, Rick? Margaret was studying the letters more closely now, holding them up to the light. These aren't 20-year-old papers, she said slowly. The ink is too fresh, and this letterhead. She looked up at Rick with disgust. You can buy vintage military stationery on eBay for $30. Rick's composure finally cracked completely. Fine. Harold owed me money, okay? Real money from real poker debts. Maybe I enhanced some of the documentation, but the core debt was legitimate. Enhanced, I repeated. Just like you enhanced your military service record to steal veteran benefits. I never stole anything. I earned those contracts through superior bids and quality work. Built on fraudulent certifications, Margaret said quietly. Richard, do you have any idea what you've done to me? To my family's reputation. My father's company has partnered with yours on 6 major projects. We vouched for your veteran status to our clients. Rick's desperation was becoming palpable. Maggie, we can fix this. We'll pay the kid back, make this right. With what money? She snapped. If you've been systematically defrauding elderly men for years, every dollar we have is potentially stolen. My phone buzzed with a call from Detective Chen. Perfect timing. David, I got your mother's message, she said when I answered. We need to meet immediately. I've been working with federal investigators, and we have some developments you need to know about. I put the call on speaker. Detective, I'm actually at Rick Castellano's house right now with his wife. We found some very interesting evidence. You're where? Her voice sharpened. David, get out of there immediately. We have reason to believe Castellano may be involved in Thomas Bergen's death, and we've just learned he has a history of violence when cornered. The color drained from Margaret's face, but Rick just stood there with an expression I couldn't read. What kind of history? I asked, though I was already backing toward the front door. 2 prior assault charges, both dismissed when the victims suddenly dropped their complaints and left town, Detective Chen said. David, I'm sending units to that address right now. Get out. That's when Rick smiled, and I realized we'd made a terrible mistake coming here. Too late for that, he said, and I heard the front door slam shut behind us. Rick's smile sent ice through my veins. I heard the distinct click of a deadbolt turning, and when I glanced toward the office windows, I noticed for the first time that they had security bars, decorative wrought iron that suddenly looked a lot more sinister. Richard, what are you doing? Margaret's voice was tight with fear. Damage control, Rick said, pulling his phone from his pocket. Detective Chen, if you're still listening, here's how this is going to work. Your boy David here came to my house making wild accusations and threatening my wife. Things got heated, and unfortunately, he had some kind of accident. Rick, don't do anything stupid, Detective Chen's voice crackled through my phone speaker. We have units 2 minutes out. 2 minutes is a long time, Rick said conversationally. He moved to a cabinet near the window and pulled out what looked like a baseball bat. Maggie, sweetheart, you're going to tell the police that David attacked me first. Self-defense is perfectly legal in this state. I'm not lying for you anymore, Margaret said, but she was backing away from both of us. 12 years of lies, Richard. 12 years of building my life around a fantasy. Our life, Rick corrected. Built with my hard work and my planning. Harold Morrison was going to lose that money anyway, at least this way it went towards something productive. Productive? I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. You destroyed an old man's final years. You made him afraid to tell his own family what was happening. Harold made his own choices, Rick said, testing the weight of the bat. Every signature on those promissory notes was real, even if the circumstances were flexible. He could have walked away at any time. With what leverage? I pulled Grandpa's notebook from my jacket. He wrote down everything, Rick. Your threats, your fabricated evidence, your admission about Tommy Bergen. Rick's grip tightened on the bat. Let me see that. No chance. I held the notebook closer to my chest. This is going straight to Detective Chen. Actually, it's not. The sound of sirens was getting closer, but not close enough. Rick took a step toward me, and I realized how isolated we were in this office. The walls were thick, the windows barred, and Margaret had retreated to the far corner. That's when she surprised everyone. Richard Vincent Castellano, she said in a voice I hadn't heard before, cold, authoritative, completely controlled. Born September 12, 1968, in Newark. Never enlisted in any branch of military service. Social Security number 589-44-7721. Rick spun toward her. Maggie, what the hell? I memorized those details years ago for business applications, she continued, speaking directly to my phone. Detective Chen, my husband has no military service record because he spent 1987 to 1989 in county jail for check fraud. I have the court documents in my filing cabinet. You've been checking up on me. Rick's voice was incredulous. I've been protecting my family's business interests, Margaret said calmly. Did you really think I'd hand over $2 million without conducting a background check? I knew you were lying about Vietnam from day one. My mouth fell open. You knew. I knew about the military service, yes. But I thought it was just masculine insecurity. Lots of men exaggerate their backgrounds. She looked at Rick with something approaching pity. I never imagined you were using stolen valor to defraud the government, or that you were systematically conning elderly men out of their life savings. The sirens were much closer now, probably turning onto Rick Street. But he still had the bat, and something in his expression had shifted from desperation to pure rage. 12 years, Maggie. 12 years I've been building something for us, and you're going to throw it all away for some kid you met 20 minutes ago. I'm throwing it away because it was built on lies, she said firmly. And because you threatened to murder someone in my living room. That's when Rick charged toward me with the bat raised above his head, and I realized Detective Chen's backup wasn't going to arrive in time. I dove sideways behind Rick's mahogany desk as the bat whistled through the air where my head had been a split second earlier. The heavy wood cracked against the wall, leaving a dent in what was probably expensive wallpaper. Richard, stop. Margaret screamed, but Rick was already winding up for another swing. I scrambled on my hands and knees toward the filing cabinets, clutching Grandpa's notebook against my chest. The sirens were definitely on our street now. I could hear car doors slamming outside, but Rick seemed beyond caring about consequences. Give me that fucking notebook, he snarled, following me around the desk. You have no idea what you're destroying. The only thing getting destroyed is your scam, I shot back, grabbing the edge of a heavy filing cabinet to pull myself up. How many other Tommy Bergens are there, Rick? How many people died because they knew too much about your operation? Rick's face went white. Tommy had a heart attack. Natural causes. Right after you told my grandfather about his death, I said, remembering Grandpa's final notebook entry. Funny timing for a heart attack, don't you think? Margaret had moved to the window and was trying to unlock the security bars. The police are here, she called out. Richard, put the bat down. But Rick wasn't listening anymore. He took another swing at me, this time catching the edge of the filing cabinet. The impact sent papers flying and knocked over a framed photo of Rick and Margaret at some charity gala, another lie built on stolen money. You know what Harold's real problem was? Rick panted, raising the bat again. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. Just like you, kid. Thought he could outsmart Rick Castellano. I feinted left, then dove right toward the office door. My fingers found the handle just as Rick's bat splintered the doorframe inches from my skull. The door's locked from the outside, Margaret said desperately. The emergency release is in the kitchen. Of course Rick had installed a security system that could trap people inside. This whole house was probably designed to contain his victims. Heavy pounding started on the front door, followed by Detective Chen's amplified voice, police. Open up. Rick paused, breathing hard, the bat still gripped in both hands. For a moment, I thought he might actually surrender. Then he looked at Margaret with something that might have been love or might have been pure calculation. We can still fix this, Maggie. Tell them David broke in, attacked me, tried to extort money from us. Your word against his. Margaret stared at her husband like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Fix this. Richard, you've been using my father's business connections to legitimize your fraud. You've made me an unwitting accomplice to elder abuse. You've stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars and probably killed at least one person to cover it up. I never killed anyone. Then where's the real Tommy Bergen? I demanded, still clutching the notebook. Because according to this, my grandfather was planning to contact him about your scam right before Bergen mysteriously died of a heart attack. Rick's grip on the bat loosened slightly. Tommy was weak. He got scared when the federal investigators started sniffing around other cases. Started talking about coming clean. So you killed him. It wasn't a question. I didn't kill him. Rick's voice cracked. I couldn't let him destroy everything I built. Margaret's charity work, the business, all the legitimate veterans we've helped through the contracts. By poisoning him. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. The pounding on the front door intensified, joined by what sounded like power tools. Detective Chen hadn't been kidding about sending backup. Rick looked between Margaret and me, and I saw the exact moment he realized it was over. His shoulders sagged, the bat drooping toward the floor. The foxglove was Margaret's idea, he said quietly. For the garden. Tommy had a bad heart anyway, I just accelerated the timeline. Margaret's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room besides the police breaking down the front door. The front door finally gave way with a thunderous crash, and I heard Detective Chen's voice echoing through the house, David. Margaret. Where are you? In here. I shouted, but Rick suddenly grabbed my arm with his free hand, the bat still dangling from the other. You're going to tell them this was all a misunderstanding, he hissed in my ear. That we worked out a payment arrangement and everything's fine. Like hell I am. I tried to pull away, but his grip was surprisingly strong. Margaret had backed herself into the corner farthest from both of us, her face pale but her voice steady when she called out, Detective Chen. We're in the home office. Richard has a weapon. Maggie, what are you doing? Rick's voice cracked with genuine hurt. I did this all for us. The house, the business, everything we built together. You built it on Harold Morrison's grave, she said coldly. And Tommy Bergen's. How many others, Richard? How many other heart attacks were really murders? Heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway toward us. Rick's grip on my arm tightened painfully, and I could see him calculating whether he had time for one more swing with the bat. Rick Castellano. Detective Chen's voice was right outside the door now. The building is surrounded. Release David and step away from any weapons. I need 5 more minutes. Rick shouted back. 5 minutes to explain what really happened. The only thing that happened, I said, finally wrenching my arm free, is that you've been running a systematic fraud operation targeting elderly veterans. And when Tommy Bergen threatened to expose you, you poisoned him with foxglove. Rick's face went ashen. I never said that. Margaret, you heard me, I never admitted to anything. But Margaret was staring at him with horror. The foxglove in our garden. You insisted we plant it last spring, right after Tommy's funeral. You said it would be a beautiful memorial. That's not, Rick started, then stopped as the implications hit him. Detective Chen's voice came through the door again. Mr. Castellano, we have a warrant for your arrest on federal charges of stolen valor, wire fraud, and elder abuse. We also have some questions about Thomas Bergen's death. Open this door now. Rick dropped the bat with a clatter and sank into his desk chair, suddenly looking every one of his 50-plus years. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he said quietly. Harold he was so lonely after his wife died. So grateful for friendship. The poker game started as legitimate socializing. When did they stop being legitimate? I asked, still holding Grandpa's notebook like a shield. When I realized how much money he had access to. The life insurance, the farm sale, his pension. Rick's voice was barely audible. I told myself I was just borrowing it. That I'd pay him back once the business took off. Margaret made a sound of disgust. With what money? Every dollar you've made came from fraudulent veteran contracts. Those contracts were legitimate work. We delivered quality construction services. Under false pretenses, Detective Chen's voice interrupted. The door handle was rattling now, followed by what sounded like lockpicking tools. You claimed veteran status you never earned, disabilities you never suffered, service records you fabricated. Rick looked up at me with something that might have been remorse. Your grandfather wasn't the first, David. But I swear to you, he was going to be the last. I was going to stop after we paid off the house. How many others? I demanded. Including Tommy, 7. Maybe 8. Rick's voice was getting smaller. But most of them died of natural causes. Tommy was the only one who. He couldn't finish the sentence. The office door burst open, and Detective Chen entered with 2 uniformed officers, weapons drawn but pointed downward. Rick immediately raised his hands above his head. Richard Vincent Castellano, Detective Chen said formally, you're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy, stolen valor, and suspicion of murder in the death of Thomas Bergen. As the handcuffs clicked around Rick's wrists, he looked back at Margaret one last time. I'm sorry, Maggie. I never wanted you to get hurt by this. Margaret's response was ice cold. The only person I feel sorry for is Harold Morrison. And David's family, who trusted you with their grief. Detective Chen nodded to me. David, we're going to need that notebook and a full statement. This case is about to get much bigger. As they led Rick away, I realized we'd won something more important than just justice. We'd given Grandpa his dignity back. 3 months later, I stood in the same courtroom where Rick Castellano had just been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The judge had been thorough: wire fraud, elder abuse, stolen valor, and second-degree murder in Tommy Bergen's death. Margaret's testimony about the Foxglove Garden had been the final nail in his coffin. The defendant systematically preyed upon elderly veterans, Judge Morrison had said, and I couldn't help but smile at the ironic name match, exploiting their loneliness and patriotism for personal gain. Mr. Castellano's crimes represent a fundamental betrayal of the values our military veterans embodied. As we walked down the courthouse steps, Detective Chen handed me a manila envelope thick with documents. What's this? I asked. Asset forfeiture paperwork, she said with satisfaction. The house in Meadowbrook Estates, Rick's business accounts, even that silver BMW, it's all being liquidated to compensate his victims. Your family should receive approximately $340,000 from the settlement. Mom grabbed my arm. $300,000. David, that's more than twice what Dad lost. Interest and penalties, Detective Chen explained. Plus Rick had been skimming from his legitimate business accounts to pay for his lifestyle. Margaret Castellano has been incredibly cooperative. She's turning over every asset that can be traced to fraudulent activity. I thought about Margaret, who'd filed for divorce the day after Rick's arrest and had spent the past 3 months working with federal investigators to unravel her husband's crimes. She'd lost everything: her marriage, her home, even her charity work had been suspended pending investigation, but she'd never wavered in her cooperation. What about the other families? I asked. We've identified 11 victims total, Detective Chen said. Thanks to your grandfather's notebook and the records Margaret provided, we were able to track down most of their families. The Bergen family is finally getting answers about Tommy's death, and 6 other families are receiving settlements. As we reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a split second, my heart raced, too many memories of Rick's threats. But when I opened it, I smiled. Asterisk David, this is Margaret Castellano. I wanted you to know that I've established the Harold Morrison Memorial Foundation for Elder Fraud Prevention. Your grandfather's story will help protect other families. Thank you for having the courage to seek the truth, asterisk. I showed the text to Mom, who wiped her eyes with a tissue. Your grandfather would be so proud, she said. Not just of the money, but of how you stood up for him when he couldn't stand up for himself. That evening, I drove to Grandpa's grave for the first time since the trial began. His headstone looked smaller than I remembered, weathered by 3 years of seasons, but the inscription was still clear: Harold Morrison, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. I placed Grandpa's notebook, now photocopied and returned by the FBI, on the grass beside the stone. We got him, Grandpa, I said quietly. Rick Castellano will never hurt another family. And everyone knows the truth now, about his lies, about your real service in Germany, about how you tried to protect us even when you were scared. A cool October breeze rustled the trees around the cemetery, and for just a moment, I could swear I heard an echo of Grandpa's voice: asterisk good boy, David. Always knew you were the smart one, asterisk. I walked back to my car with lighter steps than I'd had in months, knowing that Harold Morrison's honor had been restored, and his memory was finally safe from the man who tried to steal it. The stranger at the gym would never hurt anyone again.